Welcome back into Cherry Picking. Today's video must add week 17 of the fantasy hockey season, as always, presented by FanDuel Canada, North America's #1 sportsbook. That link is in the description below to download the app today. Not as packed of a week as last week, I would say, but still a decent amount of teams playing 4 games, and those teams are the Flames, the Red Wings, the Kings, the Islanders, the Flyers, the Seattle Kraken, and the Vancouver Canucks. As I've mentioned the last few videos, Daily Faceoff has a weekly NHL schedule. You could see how many games each team is playing to help you out, and the 2 teams playing 2 games, or sorry, 3 teams, the Leafs, the Sharks, and the Senators. We have 5 players to look at to add for this week. Let's get into it. All right, the first player that we're adding is Blake Coleman on the Calgary Flames, 33% rostered, has the ability to play center, left wing, and right wing in Yahoo Fantasy Hockey Leagues. This is a really good streamer for this week, and if he's available, could be a good longevity pickup as well. If you look at his stats for the year, 46 games played, 10 goals, 16 assists, a decent amount of hits there with 92, so contributing there. But Blake Coleman's always been a guy that's like hit or miss in terms of when you're picking him up. He's kind of always available on the waiver wire, and then for like a 2-month period, he won't be on the waiver wire. For at least the last 2 years, I feel like that's kind of been the case. He's always paired up with Michael Backlund. Both of them create a solid amount of offense, especially when you look at like the analytical version of it. That's what Coleman's been doing well recently. Leads the team in expected goals for as of late. Right up there with actually Igor Sharangovich, who is another guy I thought of adding to this list, and someone who I thought maybe he's a better fit to add to your team than Coleman, because they do similar things. But Coleman has been, I think, is a better scorer overall, and will just end up getting more fantasy points. Maybe not scoring to that fact, but like hits, let's say. He also plays a lot more. I think the biggest thing for Coleman, his last 3 games, he's played at least 20 minutes. Sharangovich isn't getting those type of minutes right now. If you look at Blake Coleman as well, just where he's playing, as I mentioned with Michael Backlund, Matt Coronato, who's playing really well so far with the Flames at least, or especially the last couple weeks. He's playing on that second power play unit where, Sharangovich does play on the first power play, and then they actually play on the second penalty kill together. A really solid penalty killing team, the Calgary Flames, especially when Coleman and Sharangovich are on the ice together. So Coleman is definitely a guy to be looking at this week. He's probably up on the top of my list in terms of top streamers, considering the Flames play 4 games. But as I mentioned, if he's available in your league and you can pick him up and you need to fill some holes because he can play so many different positions, I think he's a great pickup. All right, Jonathan Drouin on the Colorado Avalanche is the next guy we're going to be picking up this week. 28% rostered, can play that left wing and right wing if you're playing Yahoo Fantasy Hockey Leagues, and I'd assume pretty much every other league as well, or every types of league. Drouin's been in and out of the lineup all year, has only played 16 games, 4 goals and 12 assists to show for it. So a point per game when he is playing, because most of the time when he is on the ice or when he is healthy, he's playing with Nathan MacKinnon and Mikko Rantanen, which is the case right now. He's also playing on that first power play. I've talked about Nichushkin, Lehkonen, and Drouin on this show all year, and it just goes to show how valuable MacKinnon and Rantanen are, obviously, when you're playing with them. 2 premier players in the NHL that are so good in fantasy hockey. So if you get the opportunity to pick up someone who's playing with those 2 guys, it's a no-brainer, in my opinion. And he's been producing Drouin very well over the last couple games, playing with these guys, and even playing on that second line for a bit. It was Drouin, Middlestat, and Lehkonen, I believe, and now playing on this first line. I think that gives him even more of a reason to pick him up. And you see in the short games, like 16 games played, he's averaging almost 21 minutes per game. So when he is healthy, Jared Bednar is using him a lot, which means you should be picking him up on your fantasy team if he's available in your league. All right, one of my favorite pickups of the week, not a streamer for this week because the Leafs only play 2 games, but I think we're seeing a little bit of a switch here, and it's honestly has been happening for the past month or so. But Oliver Ekman-Larsson on the Toronto Maple Leafs, 20% rostered, obviously one of their better offensive defensemen. I know everyone always looks at Morgan Rielly in that fact, but it's kind of switched. Now, Craig Berube talked about it before the Tampa game. He put Morgan Rielly with Jake McCabe in terms of like a 5-on-5 setting, and says that Riley's really been struggling this year, and it has been one of his worst years we've seen probably in maybe his NHL career, but definitely over the last 4 or 5, where he's had a huge role in the offense when Sheldon Keefe was the coach, especially on the power play as well. This season, just not the case. Really bad plus-minus, not producing as many points as we've seen in years past as well. So I think we start to look at other players on the Leafs who can produce, and Oliver Ekman-Larsson has been doing that. 5 points in his last 5 games. Berube talked about activating, the defenseman a little bit more recently in terms of an offensive rate or usage, and I think when he's talking about that, he's talking about Morgan Rielly and Oliver Ekman-Larsson. And then if you watch that game that they played against Columbus, obviously they got killed, but if you look at early on in that game, Ekman-Larsson and Rielly, when they were getting opportunities in the offensive zone, Rielly was always looking to pass and Ekman-Larsson was always looking to shoot, is one thing that I kind of realized. And you could see that as well. Berube kind of promised overall production is going to increase from defensemen. He didn't single out any guys, but I think you'd assume it'd be Rielly and Ekman-Larsson, and Ekman-Larsson has been the guy that's been benefiting from this message that Berube kind of put across to the defensemen, and I'm sure it's within their game plan as well. So Ekman-Larsson is the guy I'd rather have at this point. Morgan Rielly is really just taking a downturn this season. If you look at just the opportunities between the two and how Ekman-Larsson's been producing, they're quite equal, but you look at the numbers, Ekman-Larsson is far and above been the better offensive defenseman over the past month or so, and even you could say any part of the season that really Ekman-Larsson's been playing at. So I think it's a really important thing to kind of note. Ekman-Larsson, only 20% rostered, going to be available in a lot of leagues. They both play on the second power play, but as I mentioned, Ekman-Larsson taking more of the opportunity. Maybe you see Ekman-Larsson get put onto that first power play as well. We've seen this power play go from 5 forwards to 4 forwards a bunch of times, and it's always going to be either Ekman-Larsson or Morgan Rielly in that spot. So 20% rostered, I think this is a great opportunity to try to get Ekman-Larsson, even though the fact they only play 2 games this week. All right, another great streamer for this week, only 13% rostered, and that's Jaden Schwartz on the Seattle Kraken. As I mentioned, really good streamer opportunity with 4 games for Seattle this week, and they have some pretty easy matchups, I would say, for fantasy hockey players as a whole. They play the Oilers, the Ducks, the Sharks, and the Flames. Schwartz is 7th in the NHL in individual expected goals for, so offense created since last Monday, since January 13th, creating a ton of offense for his line mates in Beniers and Capo, who've been producing at a solid rate as well, playing on that first power play. I think with 4 games, I think he's going to be able to break through the large expected goals for number and not like necessarily the number that would match it in terms of points production. I've talked about him in other shows before, so obviously at this point for Seattle, there's not a ton of offense always being created, but it seems like it's coming from a consistent few for the past month or so. Caco's been a great addition to Jaden Schwartz's game as well, adding it to his repertoire, you could say. But yeah, Jaden Schwartz is definitely the guy in Seattle I would look at picking up this week, especially considering his roster percentage. So if you need, that center left wing, I think Schwartz would be a really good streamer for you this week. All right, the last guy we're going to be picking up, 1% rostered, really good for, honestly, some spot starts in terms of like DFS if you like to play that, but also fantasy hockey this week. If you're in those really deep leagues, I think Alex Turcotte can be a guy you pick up. Plays a center and left wing position. This year, 40 games played with the big club at 7 goals, 12 assists. Playing on that first line with Kempe and Kopitar is obviously the most important thing here, and it's really the only thing you need for the sell job other than the fact that the Kings play 4 games this week. Playing on that first line, he's playing on the second power play. He's got 2 goals and an assist over his last 4 games as well. I just think there's so much upside of playing primarily all your 5-on-5 hockey, essentially with Anze Kopitar and Adrian Kempe, because we've seen for the last, especially this year, but for the last 2 years, that's where the offense have come. We've seen a ton of guys get mixed into that spot. Alex Laferriere at the beginning of the year, he had a really good first month or so playing on that first line. You look at last year as well, Trevor Moore was a guy who took all the opportunities playing on that first line, had a really good year, a little bit of a down year for him this year. Turcotte has taken the opportunity, he's been playing up there for a little bit now. We've seen it in spurts, but maybe he carries that momentum into this week with 4 games, playing a little bit more regularly with these guys is maybe going to be able to help him. So, 5th overall pick back in 2019, so it's kind of now or never. If you can produce with Kempe and Kopitar, you kind of keep your job, but if you can't produce with those 2 players, then there's obviously something wrong. Turcotte, 1% rostered right now in a lot of leagues or in a lot of platforms that you're going to be playing on, so he's the deep sleeper of the week. All right, thank you guys for tuning in. Let me know what you thought of Must-Add for Week 17 of the Fantasy Hockey season. Shout out to FanDuel Canada for sponsoring the video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.